Dr. Ann Sales is also a nurse and a distinguished researcher at Mizzou focused on theory-based design of implementation interventions and how behavior impacts patient outcomes. The fact that she's completed 40 funded research projects says a lot about her deep commitment to the work and why it's sometimes difficult to separate work life and personal life. But for Ann, it's a big win when those two can be combined. She has just returned from an implementation science training institute in Southern Africa with participants from 10 African nations. I mean, she's just back. She told me earlier her body feels like she's not here yet. She's still over Bermuda, okay? And this was a personal trip for her because Ann was born and raised in South Africa and Botswana. And for that, we got a little treat for you. I want you to say, or repeat back to me, this phrase. Dume la ma. Do it one more time. Dume la ma. Okay. Now that is a friendly greeting in Botswana and South Africa to a friend. So, come on up here. We're going to do it now. I want you to smile at Ann while we say Dume la ma. Dume la ma.
Dumelang bomale bora, which means thank you back. Okay, so I am actually really grateful for the opportunity not just to be here, but to be the last of this really amazing group of speakers, because I think that what I'm going to talk about kind of ties pieces together, at least I hope it does. And I'm going to talk about my research focus, which is implementation science, implementation research, and hopefully make the connections to how this can support and motivate a lot of the kind of work we talked about today. Actually, I have a brief example at the end, and I was thinking, well, you know, if I were really a risk taker, like Dr. Griggs was talking about, I would have not done a canned example, but instead just picked something from one of the talks earlier, because honestly, any one of the things that people have talked about today could be applied into implementation research. So I'm going to start with just a very brief definition of implementation, because I think that's critical to understanding what this is that we're doing, what the science is about. So the definition that I use is that implementation is a process of planned human behavior change under organizational constraints. And in that, we share, this is a very synthetic discipline. We share a lot of information, a lot of theories, a lot of conceptual knowledge from other disciplines. But the key words that I just wanted to emphasize in terms of what we are trying to understand, we're trying to understand the planning aspects, and we've heard some of the planning issues, much of the planning that goes on in the science that we've heard about today. We're trying to understand the behavior change of everyone who's involved in these processes. And we're also trying to understand the constraints, but also the facilitators which support that change or constrain it. And from that definition of implementation, the science piece flows fairly naturally. We're studying these processes to understand how to optimize them. There's also a component of practice, which is very much allied with quality improvement and a lot of the work that goes on in healthcare settings, community-based settings all the time, to use tools from this kind of research to implement innovations more effectively. And I think that's the key point to what we've been talking about today. The majority of people talking at this event, and most of the posters that you've seen, have to do with innovating, discovery, new things that people are learning about different aspects of the human condition and health issues. Many of you will have seen this translational pipeline that comes from the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, NCATS. And if you look at what's off on kind of the 2 o'clock angle on that circle, that's where basic research is. T0, sometimes called T1. T1 often is first translation to humans, and the focus there is on safety, efficacy. T2 is where we begin to get into the uses of those the discoveries and translating them into the initial preclinical and then clinical practice. And this is where people generally think about implementation work, when they think about it at all, that it starts to happen in T2 and then very much in T3, when you start to move into not just testing things in clinical human populations, but beginning to move into routine practice. And then there's T4, which is up at the top at the 12 o'clock point, and Dr. Griggs talked about this kind of work, which is translating out from the institutional clinical settings to community, public health, and people are beginning to talk about T5, which is the globe, the entire human population, but also I would say a sort of One Health approach as well, including not just humans, but other animals and other life forms. So, how can implementation science or practice help with innovation? And fundamentally, what we spend our time doing, for the most part, is looking at the factors that affect the uptake or implementation of a new innovation, or sometimes something that has good evidence but is not currently in clinical practice. So one of the things that we can do and do a lot of is early planning for implementation and beginning to think even much earlier in the process than T2 or T3, beginning to think about what are the factors that will actually make this innovation likely to be taken up, what are the factors that are likely to be barriers or to impede it. So I'm going to give you a very quick example of work that I'm currently involved in. This is actually a randomized clinical trial that's in the VA, Veterans Health Administration. Its number is Co-op Studies Project 2008, and it's a study of pentoxifylline in diabetic kidney disease. Pentoxifylline is an old drug. It's been around for a long time, usually used in vascular disorders, has not been used for kidney disease in the past, but it has properties and it has potential for retarding the progression of kidney disorders to end-stage renal disease. And so it's a repurposing trial. So there are 40 sites around the US, VA hospitals, that are testing this. It's a pragmatic trial, which means that people are not taken off of their current regimens before starting pentoxifylline. It's added to the regimen that they're currently on when they're randomized to intervention. And that in and of itself makes it a much easier trial to enroll patients than if you say to somebody who's got active kidney disease, we're going to take you off your meds and start you on something different. The outcome is to slow progression to end-stage renal disease. So our sub-study, the implementation science piece of this, is the outcome that we're aiming for is to have a plan by the end of the trial, which is not until 2030. This is actually a 10-year trial. And it has a large sample size and a long period of observation and analysis because there's an assumption that this is not going to have a major effect. It'll be a moderate effect. And so we need large sample and many years. Diabetic kidney disease takes years to develop. So our outcome is to plan for implementing the findings at the end of the trial. And we're interested in those factors that are likely to have impact on implementation. So there are some of these we already know, and they're pretty clear. We've been doing interviews for the last 2 or 3 years now. There are competing drugs that, some of which are just coming on the market now. Most of you will know about the SGLT2 inhibitors, which have been out on the market for some time, which initially were used mostly for cardiovascular disease, but have been shown to have a significant impact, positive impact on kidney disease, and are being used significantly, a lot for that. The GLP-1s, which are the obesity drugs, anti-obesity drugs that are much newer, have also been shown, not so much in randomized trials, but observationally in surveillance work, to have an effect also on the kidney. But these two drugs are way more expensive than pentoxifylline, which has been out on the market for a long time. So that's one issue, competing drugs. Another is using an older drug with a patient population. People tend to think that if something is older, it's not as good, it's not as effective, and there's a bias that people hold. And this is both providers and patients. So these are issues that affect both groups. There's an issue of polypharmacy. Most of these patients are older, and many of them are already on 10 to 15 drugs every single day. So adding one more drug is a real problem. And then finally, this is off-label use, and this is intentional. Again, this was not designed, as an FDA type of trial. This is one to look at this in practice, and whether people will use a drug off-label is always an open question. So this is where we are at this point in our sub-study. As I said, we're about halfway through the period now. We're now at 2025. There are 5 more years to go in the final trial, although the preliminary analyses will probably be done in about 1.5 to 2 years. And that, of course, will give us some information about whether it looks like there's a signal that this is going to be positive. So we've been, I just want to note the bottom arrow. If the findings are negative, if pentoxifylline does not show an independent effect, then we don't have to do anything. Our job's done. We simply exit the scene. But assuming that we will find positive findings, our next step is to begin to develop implementation strategies based on the factors that we've identified, and then to actually deploy these implementation strategies. I won't go into detail about what these are, but 2 that we're likely to use are opinion leaders and 3 actually, opinion leaders, feedback, and academic detailing. And then ultimately we'll assess the uptake of pentoxifylline. So essentially what I want to say is the bottom line, the take-home message here is thinking about implementation early and often throughout the discovery process can be useful. This is an example of a clinical trial which is already well developed within the discovery process. Planning is an important activity, even when you don't know what you're planning for. And that's actually one of the bigger reasons why I think we see little uptake of implementation science and factors when we talk about early discovery phases. And then finally, the pitch I would make is that through this kind of research, we learn more about what affects successful implementation and what is unsuccessful. And the more that we can deploy this knowledge, the more understanding we'll gain. So that's it for my...
Wonderful.
Great, go ahead.
All right, so the pentoxifylline, it's a repurposed trial. If it works, it's not designed to get FDA labeling. So you have 2 drugs that are labeled and then pentoxifylline. So is it fair to do, it sounds like it is fair to do an implementation science project on drugs that have been proven to be effective in RCT but have not been FDA approved?
So what I would say is actually neither the SGLT2 inhibitors
So
nor...
none of them are FDA approved?
They're not, none of them
So-
have this label indication.
So you can. You don't
Yeah.
need to be an FDA-approved drug
Right.
to do it. And then next, I mean, this is got a long gestation time. So did you write the implementation science part in the original RCT? Or is this a proposed add-on or a thought for an add-on, or is it an add-on that's being actually developed?
That's a great question. So the answer is no, it was not part of the proposed trial. The trial was already underway when we got involved. However, the VA wanted to do pilot work because of this belief that it's important to get implementation thinking happening early on while clinical trials are going on. So we were one of 5 pilot studies that were actually funded by VA about 4 years ago now to do this kind of work.
Just do the preparation.
Yeah.
Does the NIH have any similar type of RFA?
No.
Just the VA?
Yeah.
So for all the clinical trialists in the room, since we brought Dr. Sales from Michigan to the University of Missouri, I've been trying to remind all the clinical trialists that she's here at the University of Missouri, available system-wide for clinicians that know about results from RCTs. It doesn't have to be their trial. Know about results from RCTs that they then want to develop an implementation science project. And so that's the goal, for everyone to be coming to Dr. Sales with those ideas, and she'll help you develop them.
And thank you for that, because it allows me to do one more pitch, which is that we are in the process of launching an online asynchronous short course for faculty, although I'm happy also for people who are pre-faculty to be involved in understanding implementation science, because honestly and obviously one person can't do the range of what's needed. We need more people doing this kind of work.
Great. I think with that, let's say thanks to Anne.